Okay, good evening, everybody. And it's great to welcome you and to see you as part of this initiative entitled the Songwriters Circle. This is one in a series that we are hosting at Sunderland Millfield as part of this lockdown. And we're pleased that you're able to join us for this very unique time. Just to give you a quick introduction then as to what exactly we're going to be doing and who we've got as part of our lineup this evening, I'm pleased to introduce to you Commissioner Keith Banks. Keith lives in retirement in Scotland, just outside Glasgow. Keith held a number of appointments during active officership. Some of those included Divisional Commander, Chief Secretary, International Secretary for Personnel. And then in retirement, he had the very unique ministry of being the chaplain at Glasgow Airport. We're also pleased to have Chris Brindley with us this evening, Songs Leader of Brisbane Temple. Chris has travelled the furthest to be here this evening. And it's also very early for you across there. You're 9 hours ahead. And so we're very grateful to you making that extra effort for being with us. And of course, you have tapped into a few of our calls already during this period of time. And so we're pleased to now actually have you as a guest as well. Chris works as a business analyst for the Salvation Army across in Australia and was formerly the Territorial Music Secretary for the Australia Eastern Territory and is very prominent in music and creative arts in that neck of the woods. And so welcome, Chris. Andrew Maycock, our bandmaster at Sunderland Millfield. We're absolutely delighted that Andrew is able to join with us. Andrew's head of music in a large secondary school in Middlesbrough. And previous to that was professional musician within the British Army, and he was the principal percussionist of the Her Majesty's band, the Welsh Guards. And again, welcome, Andrew. And last but by no means least is Songs Leader Andrew Wicker of the Swindon Corps. And Andrew also is a head of music in a large secondary school and studied at the world famous Oxford University prior to his career in education. And so we're absolutely delighted to have these four songwriters with us this evening. It's relevant to note from the outset that all are published within the Salvation Army's vocal journals, predominantly within the Sing to the Lord, which is in the UK territory, but also some have work published across in the USA and in Australia, and many more pieces are in manuscript too. And another point to make at the outset is that all four of our guests are lyricists and composers. So they've written both the music and the words. And so that'll be really interesting to tap into as this conversation progresses. But as we meet together during a time where we can't actually physically get together for rehearsals, for worship, for concerts and other such like occasions, we just hope and we pray that this will be a time of enjoyment and above all a time of blessing as we meet and share together in these moments. So without any further ado, let's get started. So part A will see us have a general discussion about songwriting in general. So Keith, as a lyricist, how often do you write? And how or where does that process start for you?
Well, good evening, Andrew, and good evening, everybody. This is absolutely great to be together like this, and thank you, Andrew, for organising it. Yeah, the easy answer to the first part of your question is it depends. Ideas for lyrics and for poetry come to me.
We've lost Keith.
Excuse me, did you lose me there?
Just momentarily, yeah. but fire away.
Yeah. Ideas for writing lyrics or poetry sort of come two ways, really, or opportunities for it, I should say. There are the times when an idea suddenly bursts out of the mind or out of the heart, and I just sit down and start thinking and writing about it. And then there are the times when I write to order, when people ask me to write, and you've done that to me once or twice, Andrew. Could I write some lyrics for a particular occasion, and this is the theme, and so on. As far as ideas come to me when I'm walking, when I'm talking, when I'm reading scripture. God brings an idea to me, brings a thought to me, and something sort of clicks inside, and I know that that's something I've got to think about a little bit more. An example of that is that just a few weeks ago, I was walking on the beach just where I live and saw some broken pieces of green glass. And when I went back the next day, I saw a lot more. And every day I went, I began to see and collect this green glass, broken fragments of green glass. And it emerged just gently in my mind that the Lord wanted me to write something about brokenness. And the idea came, and so a poem emerged about brokenness and how there's a beauty in brokenness. But then, of course, there's writing to order, writing lyrics for a musical. I did the lyrics for the Congress musical, The Covenant, in 2015, with Kevin and Carl Larson. And that's writing to order. And when you're doing that, when I'm doing that, it's possible to produce lyrics every couple of days or so, and a song every couple of days, and so it goes on. So it does depend how and when and what.
Great, thank you, Keith. And so a similar question for you, Chris, but from the musician's perspective. As a composer, how often do you write, and how or where does that process start for you? Thanks, Chris.
Well, I'd get to write a little bit in my previous role, but not as much at the moment. But I've got a couple of things that are working. So thank you also for letting me be part of this. It's great to see some wonderful writers and lyricists here, and to be part of it. I guess in the same way as Commissioner Keith, it was two situations: one where I need to write, and one where I have to choose to write. Where I need to, it's usually research based. I'll read on something until I'm inspired enough by it. It'll be on the topic or journals around it, and rhymezone.com is a good friend of mine to be able to get some lyrics working. But yeah, I need to find a way of connecting with the lyric to make it mean something, and from there we can move on. When I choose to write, it starts with the music, and it's a lot more organic. So I like to noodle on the piano for a little while to unwind, and sometimes I'll come across a chord structure or a sequence or rhythmic pattern that goes somewhere. From that initial idea, I'll explore what makes it interesting, and develop a melody using tools like intervals of chord progressions, or building or resolving dissonance, or tone rows, or other crazy things like that they use in music theory. So by that time, I've usually got a concept to work with, and then I can give it some structure from the content. So, yeah.
Great, thanks, Chris. So Andrew Maycock, one of the main ingredients, if you like, in writing a song is the melody. So one of the main ingredients in writing a song is the melody. How do you approach composing a melody? And could you give us an example of one of the melodies that you've written and how that came about?
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me on here. I kind of want to go around and say hello to everybody, but it's good to see so many of you, and I'm trying to flip between all the different pages and try to spy on who's here. It's been quite interesting, this, because I never really analysed my own work, and to sort of have a look at your own work and sort of look at it in an analysis point of view is quite weird for me. But firstly, I would say that writing melodies it's a very humbling experience. It puts you in your place. It's not always easy, and there's a great deal of trial and error, and you gain a huge amount of respect for fellow composers that have gone before, that have written the most amazing melody lines. Secondly, a little piece of advice to anyone who wants to try to start writing is to start going with what feels right. Try to forget theory and just try and play what comes from your heart, I would say. Yes, theory is important to back stuff up, but I believe that some of the best music out there is first and foremost from the soul, not what is technically correct. So if it feels right, go with it. Melody just deals with pitch and rhythm fundamentally, and then there are other elements that you can consider to shape it and to refine or suit the style. But those pitch and rhythm are the two big hitters. And when I look at the way I write tunes, I've come to realize that a lot of it comes from the way the sentence is actually spoken. So, you know, as I'm speaking now, my voice is going up and down, hopefully, to re-emphasize certain bits of the sentence. And, you know, if my voice climbs at the end like that, that was a bit dramatic. But, you know, if you're asking a question, it goes up, or the inflection goes up, and then you know, the melody line fits that. I personally think that a song feels more natural that way if it follows the sort of same speech patterns. If you one song, "Breathe and Be Still," is, as an example, it has a natural rhythm and a pitch to it. And when you speak the lines, the melody and the rhythm is almost there. And I'm not saying that's the only way I do it, but when I look back at the things I've done, it is very speech-like. But yeah, but that's the way I get students actually to start writing melody lines, is actually to get some poetry off the internet, and then, you know, try to explain about the natural shape of the line and take it that way. And then obviously the theory backs it up afterwards. If you know your theory and things like that, that's helpful. But yeah.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Thanks. So, Andrew Wicker, another key ingredient in writing a song is the accompaniment. So the supporting bit, you know, the chords, the harmony, the rhythmic features, the aspects that really make that piece whole and give it that sense of completeness. Now, as a prominent pianist in the Salvation Army, you'll have played many accompaniments over the years, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and consequently you have a sound understanding of what works and, quite frankly, what doesn't work. How do you approach writing an accompaniment? Do you write the melody once the melody is completed, or do you write as you go? How do you approach that? Thanks, Andrew.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, good to see everyone, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I always start writing at the piano. I think that's probably what most people probably do, and come up with the chord sequence and melody. And as I'm doing that, I guess ideas for accompaniment come about, really, the way I'm playing it, and sort of forming. When I'm actually writing it all out, the accompaniment is always the last thing I do, because it's the bit that probably takes the longest to write. So I tend to put it off as long as I possibly can, really. I suppose as a pianist, in terms of what makes a good accompaniment, you can kind of tell when it's not a good accompaniment, or at least you can tell if the person who's written it's not really a pianist, generally. A good accompaniment should be one that sits under the hands quite well. It doesn't necessarily have to be easy to play, but it should be something that sits nicely under the hands, really. And often, or sometimes at least, there are accompaniments that don't quite do that. When I'm writing, I tend to try and perhaps provide a little bit of rhythmical interest in the accompaniment, just to give a little bit more boost to what's going on. That probably reflects the way I play if I'm playing for congregational singing, maybe. And I kind of often try and build the intensity of the accompaniment as it goes along. If I think of a song such as I've written, such as "The Spirit of the Lord in Me," the accompaniment for that starts very sparse. And then as each verse carries on, the accompaniment kind of gets a little bit more rhythmically interesting. And so it sort of helps build up to that sort of final sort of uplifting climax of the chorus and that. So it's really important, the accompaniment, I think, and it can have a really helpful impact on the song. I can think of accompaniments that don't necessarily work, where they kind of put the singers off maybe a little bit, and obviously you don't want to do that either, I guess.
That's a great question. Great answer to the question. It's a difficult question, and you answered that really well. Thanks, Andrew, for that. So this is now open to any of you to answer, the four of you. So whoever wants to chip in with each couple of questions, and feel free just to chip in, and it'd be good to hear from a couple of you for each question. So words first or music first? what is your preference when writing?
My preference is for words first. I've done both, of course, but I feel that if I'm having to write lyrics to music that's already there, then I have to fit the words somehow. But I feel that a composer, if he's working with lyrics, can shape the music. And I think there's just a different concept there. The lyricist has to fit the words into the music, into the melody, and the composer can then shape when he writes to the lyrics that are before him. It's much easier for me for words first.
Great. Does anyone else want to chip in on that one? Words first or music first? What is your preference?
I've either. For me, it's sometimes it'll be a melodic idea, and sometimes, you know, it depends whether you're writing the words yourself or you're taking words from somewhere else. You know, some words that you see and you read the words and you hear a melodic idea and it goes from there. Sometimes I've sat around like Chris and mucked around on the piano and I've come up with an idea, and then I think, oh, I need to get some words for this, and then you end up changing the melody to fit the words, or vice versa. Or so for me personally, it depends.
Yeah.
There's no answer for me. Sorry.
And I think it's a preference thing, isn't it? You know, people do it both ways, and it works for some, it works for others in another way. So just interesting to see what you thought about that one. And so the final question of this particular section, again, if a couple of people could chip in, that would be great. When you think about songwriting or composition, and we think about it in an educational context, composition is always the aspect of, say, a GCSE or an A-level, which the students will always find the hardest. You know, they might be really good performers, they might be able to listen to music and identify key traits and elements of music. But I think it's a pretty common denominator across certainly the UK, if not, you know, indeed across the world, that the thing that students struggle with the most is composition. And so when we acknowledge the fact that songwriting composition is challenging, do you have any tips on how we can maybe make this a little bit more accessible, particularly thinking of any budding songwriters, composers who may be listening in?
I'm glad you said that about students finding it difficult, because I was scared it was just mine who did.
No, it's not just you, trust me.
I'd say just have a go, really. The more you try, the more that you actually get out of it, really. And I think the more that I've composed, the more that I've kind of discovered what works, what perhaps doesn't work. You can try out different ideas. Look at what other people do. There's nothing that can beat really looking at other songwriters who have been successful, looking at the sort of journey of the chord sequence and the tonally, what they do, how they shape the melodies, how they use the words, that kind of thing. And I'd also say try and find someone you can share your work with, someone who will sort of look at what you've done and maybe challenge you about whether something works or not, and perhaps bounce ideas off it. I've been quite pleased in the last year or so that a couple of people have asked me to look at some of the things that they've written, just to see how they're getting on and just to give them some help and advice, really.
Great. Anybody else on that one about making composition or songwriting more accessible?
I think the same as what Andrew just said. It's been wonderful with opportunities like this to be able to hear a little bit of insight from other writers, but we also have songwriters and composers symposiums every year or two in Australia, and that's an opportunity for people to share the excitement they have in writing a piece of music, share the pain and frustration of when things don't work, and from there there's people that will swap scores every now and again and say, what do you think of this, and provide some feedback, and you can really not only refine your craft but also find the energy to be able to move it forward as well.
Great, thanks Chris. So that is the end of part A. We're now going to move on to part B. And part B is where each of our songwriters are going to give us a little bit of a background into how they came about writing the song that they've chosen. And so in turn, I will play the track, and then I'll hand over to the respective writer who will just tell you a little bit of the background behind the song, how it all came to being. Many of us may have heard these songs before. We may be singing them in our own songsters, for example, but maybe don't quite know how it all happened. And so it's a real treat for us to be able to sit back and to get that insight from the horse's mouth, as it were. When I play the track, there will be a PowerPoint screen, and on that screen will tell you where that song is published, if it is published, or if it's a manuscript, and also will give you an insight into who's actually performing that particular song as well. But as I said at the outset, at a time where we're not able to meet for worship, to meet for rehearsals, for concerts, hopefully just this music will give us a bit of encouragement, a bit of enjoyment, and above all, a bit of blessing as well. So we're going to start with Andrew Wicker, and this is a song entitled It Is You.
Every hour is full.
Thanks, Andrew. Lovely song. Over to you.
Thanks. I chose that to play to you tonight because I think it's probably the one song that I've received most comments about, really, from people saying it's meant something to them or it's been helpful for them in certain situations, and hopefully you found that this evening. It's quite humbling, really, when people send messages like that. When I think of the journey that the song went on, I started writing it in the autumn of 2014. My aim with it was to write something to be used at Territorial Music School. I have for the past few years been privileged to play the piano at Territorial Music School, and having been for a couple of years, I thought I'd like to write something. The aim was to write something that would be appropriate for use in the final festival in conjunction with the prayer time, which is usually the first song that the girls' chorus sings. I think writing for a particular group in mind, particularly if you can sort of hear the sound of that group in your head, it sort of helps with the creativity, and you sort of are able to do things that you might not necessarily do if you're just writing for a generic group. It basically started off as a few chords on the piano, as I said. Normally I would always agree with what Keith said, in that it's good to have the words first. I wrote these words, so I think that's probably why this came about in a slightly different way. But it just started as a few chords on the piano. I was playing around on the piano and came across a few chords that I liked in the sequence, and just sort of think, yeah, I could do something with that. I think the idea of the lyric "It is you" was there, and that kind of shaped the chorus probably, but it was really the music that came first in this instance, which is unusual in the way I write. When it came to the lyrics, they don't necessarily come out of a particular situation that I was finding myself in, other than that they kind of express what life is like generally. Life's busy. I mean, even at the moment when nothing's going on, there's so much going on to be part of, isn't there? Life's busy, life's hectic, and it's sometimes difficult to find time for God in that time. And yet somehow God kind of comes in and breaks through those situations. The lyrics are kind of the verses for the lyrics are kind of in two sections. The first section is describing what life is like and how it can be difficult, how it can be busy and hectic. And the accompaniment for that part is very static, and the melody is quite static as well at that point. The second half of the verse, that's where God comes in, and we sense him guiding us, we sense him embracing our souls and leading us forwards. And the music kind of starts to move on a bit there. The accompaniment is a bit more flowing, semiquavers going on in the accompaniment, as if God is breaking through the situation that we find ourselves in. And then that leads to the chorus: "It is you who brings me comfort. It is you who brings me peace. It is you who turns my tears to joy, so my praise will never cease." Actually, the original words were, "It is you who turns my fears to joy," which kind of resonates with me a bit. But it ended up being tears when it was published, which was through mutual consent. In terms of the musical aspects of it, I think the one thing that kind of stands out for me in it, other than the things I've mentioned, is that R section that goes on. A few people have said that they find that really moving when they hear that. And I was trying to think why I did that. I think partly it gives the piano a chance to do something a bit more interesting. So I was probably being a little bit selfish there when I was trying to write that, because I was playing for it myself. But also, I think I probably had in mind a couple of songs. There was a song that Down Bartlett wrote about 20 years ago called "Song of Love," which has a sort of R section going on in that, and that's makes quite an impact. But also, I was thinking about in Mary Poppins, the song "Feed the Birds," and during that, the orchestra takes over the tune, and you just hear all this R going on. I think in that song, it's supposed to be the saints and apostles that look down as she sells her wares, as the words go. I think I just wanted to have this sort of angelic moment going on, and hopefully it creates something. I don't know. So that's the song. We sang it at TMS 2015. We sang it 3 times actually. We sang it on the Sunday morning in the worship. We sang it on the Wednesday night, and then also on the Saturday night concert as the prayer song, as I had originally hoped. And then I later rescored it for SATB, which is what you heard this evening.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Andrew. Really do appreciate you sharing that with us. And I totally agree that our section is really beautiful, something quite unique. As you say, it's not very often, particularly in army songs, that we have a section like that. So thank you for including that, which is very quite interesting and different, and indeed for your choice this evening. So thanks, Andrew. Sit back and relax. So we're going to hand over now to Andrew Maycock, and we're going to firstly feature his chosen song, which I'm sure is very well known to many of you, entitled Everywhere.
Stop to think how God loves you. It sounds quite incredible, and yet it's true. Nothing on this earth or in the heavens above is as sure and certain as God's love.
Thanks, Andrew. Great song. And we really do enjoy listening to that and singing that as well. So over to you.
Well, thanks for playing that, Andrew. And you know, a lot of people. It's nice that a lot of people say nice things about your songs, and I know this one has had quite a lot of legs on it, and it's. I know that it's brought a lot of blessing, and it's very humbling. I'd just like to say to Andrew Wicker, I'm going to make sure I've got an R section in the next piece, and I got some oohs in on the end of that one, but we'll have plenty of oohs and R's, and then we'll be then everybody will love it. I've always been interested in words in our songbook. I think our songbook is sometimes it's getting used less, if you know what I mean, in terms of in meetings. You know, I grew up with, you know, getting your songbook from the back when you went into the meeting and sitting down and you know, having a read through. And so I really love our songbook. And many SA composers over the years have been inspired to take text from the songbook and try and rework it and reimagine it, and that's happened on many occasions. So essentially, I haven't done anything new there. And also, like many other people, I've related very closely to the words of the late General John Gowans, who had such a fantastic way with words and the way he spoke. It's good to see Brian Mercer, actually, because I can remember sitting next to Brian in the Albert Hall, and John Gowans was preaching. And I turned to Brian and said, "How long has he been preaching for?" Because I thought it was about 10 minutes. And Brian turned to me and said, "Oh, it's about 45 minutes. And because he had just such a way with captivating people, and his words related very warmly with everyone. So getting back to the song, when I read the words without the tune, when you take the tune away from it's as high as the sky and it's as deep as the sea, they spoke to me in a really different way, in a far more intimate, meditative level, whereas the original tune is obviously in the context of the musical, and you needed to be upbeat and things like that. But really, there's no fascinating story behind it. The main reason it came to be was that the bandmaster at Croydon, Ian Parkhouse, rang me not long after I'd had a look at the words and thought, I'm going to do something with these, and asked me to, similar to Andrew Wicker, to write a song for the girls' chorus way back in 2010. And it was everywhere happened. It was a very natural thing. You know, sometimes I can sit down and I have to force the music out of myself somehow. If someone's asked me to do something, or, you know, someone's say, can you write us a piece of music for this, that and the other? And sometimes you feel forced to write a song, whereas everywhere just happened. And it just, you know, it was there within about half an hour, really. And again, because I was writing it for the girls' chorus at Territorial, again, similar to Andrew Wicker, I wrote an absurdly high descant part at the end because I thought that would give them a bit of challenge. So yeah, you know, that's really the story behind it. Nothing amazing, to be honest with you.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And obviously, you've already just mentioned the descant. I was going to pick up on that, and that's quite a unique thing. And what you tend to find with that is obviously that's published in kind of smaller print, and that's really good to have as an option. You know, if you've got any singers who are able to get those lofty heights, and we have one or two of those at the core, and so it's great to be able to have inclusion of stuff like that as well within the songs. But thanks for sharing, Andrew. Really do appreciate that, and we really do treasure that song in amongst the repertoire. And so I hand it over now to Commissioner Keith. And this song in its original format is probably, well, it's not probably, it is the shortest song by Miles, isn't it, Keith? In terms of its original format, but it's probably the most well-known, and I would suggest that this song is sung somewhere in the Salvation Army world every Sunday. So Keith, could you maybe just give us a little bit about the original, and then I'll play the track, which of course isn't the original. So if you could just give us a little bit of an explanation, which will explain exactly how this new track came about.
Yes, we're talking about the chorus, Lord, how I love you. You have done so much for me. And I selected this for tonight because that represents the first ever attempt I made to actually write something down. Such simple lyrics and such a simple melody. But it was very significant for me. I was, we used to have officers called divisional youth secretaries decades ago, and I was one of those in the Nottingham division. This was about 1975. And I've always been able to hear music in my head and hear harmony in my head, but I've never had a formal music lesson in my life. So I was very, very reluctant then to write anything down. And I said, one day I was talking to the then Captain John Larson, and I said to him, could you help me, please? I need a little bit of help here. I can hear something and I want to write it down, and I just don't know how to do it. And I guess I was expecting him to wave the wand, you know, have a 2-hour instant tutorial and then I'd know it all kind of thing. But no, he was wiser than that. He said, go and get the Salvation Army tune book, get a copy of the musical, get Jesus Spoke, and get another one, another book of music, sit down, study it, look at it, and teach yourself how to do it. So that's actually what I did. I taught myself how to reproduce a treble clef. You know, that was the first challenge. And then I had taught myself to play the piano, so I could pick out the melody and the harmonies, and I began to write something down. And I wrote, Lord, how I love you. You've done so much for me. In the 70s, this might be hard to take in for some folk, but in the 70s, we were just coming into what we would call the worship song era, but there was a reticence in the army to go along that route. And in fact, there was very strong editorial control. We could only sing officially army songs, and we couldn't take any of these so-called worship songs from other sources. But Lord, How I Love You seemed to come into that genre, and it had a Salvation Army name at the top, so that seemed to make it all right. So people then started singing, Lord, How I Love You. And it just, the Lord just took hold of it, and it went around the world. General Wallström seemed to like it, and he used it wherever he went in the world. And it eventually made its way into Happiness and Harmony, which introduced it to another generation of Salvationists, and it's now finally made it to the songbook. So after all those years, and that's the life it's lived. But I've travelled the world as a Salvation Army officer, and I can't, it's so humbling to go to Papua New Guinea, to Japan, to Zimbabwe, and to India. And when you walk into the room, people start singing, Lord, How I Love You. It's just an incredibly humbling experience. And every time I hear it, I just pray in my heart, Lord, may these people who are singing really, really love you and know what it means to know and to love you. So that's how it began. And then I got to hear that a few people were writing verses to this chorus. And I thought, well, that's really very nice, but I'd like to have a go myself. So I wrote some verses as well and sent them along to Andrew. There's a profusion of Andrews around tonight. That was Andrew Mair that I sent them to. And Andrew wrote a melody for the verses. And I think that's what we're going to hear tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Keith, for sharing such a simple chorus, yeah, incredibly effective, stood the test of time. And in my opinion, and I'm sure many, many people on this call would agree, that it is one of the songs of the Salvation Army that we really do treasure. And as you say, it's made its way into our songbook. It means an awful lot to an awful lot of people. And I was very grateful when we had that discussion up at the Glasgow Congress back in 2013 about writing some verses and putting a little bit of a contemporary twist on it. And this is how this new setting came about. So this is Keith's Lord, How I Love You. And thank you, Keith, for those beautiful lyrics, wonderful melody. And that was a live recording by Hayley Stubbs, and that was actually the premiere, the first performance of that particular rendition, with her son Harry playing the euphonium obbligato. And that was actually premiered last year at Millfield, where Keith was down along with Hayley and Harry leading a Songs to Weekend as part of our centenary celebration. So thank you very much, Keith, for sharing with us.
Andrew, I believe you're muted.
Yeah, that should be me sorted now. Super. So I'm going to play a song, Chris, and then if you could give us an overview. This is a song by Chris entitled "A Door May Open." And I absolutely love the rhythms towards the end. Absolutely great, Chris. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be able to talk about pieces of music, and I really appreciated the insights that the other fine writers have been able to share here, and I see a few others on the line as well. It's great that the Army has so many good contributors to such a wonderful expression of ministry. This piece was a request from Roland Keston for the Amsterdam Staff Songsters for their tour to the UK. I think they may have gone to Sunderland, actually. I know that they had a lot of problems with their flights to get there, but yeah, they did actually make it in the end. The piece itself is, the base concept is a desire to actively share one's own personal experience with Christ. So it's something that I'm passionate about, and I know so many are. So I looked at this, the concept of opening a door. And the melody is built on that. So with the opening line being an expanding interval, so a door opening. Well, the interval works normally applied in instrumental music. Each word I've put an emphasis on within the phrase and its place in the bar and interval to give it a natural direction. So I pray a door. The word may is at the top of a rising interval, giving some anticipation. Open is a rising six, so there's an interval that's used, that rising six, open, for a pleasurable longing, like my body lies over the ocean, is something that you want. So I pray a door may open that I might find a way, and you can see that it flows on from there. By the time you get to a way, the door is open. That's also kind of a reference to the way. And that being what Christianity was when Jesus was talking about it, the way, and the way, the truth, the life. All of these things start to gel together in the line. So with the expanding intervals, with being able to walk through the door, to be able to close it nicely, and to be able to have that concept and run with it, you come with a very strong base to work from. And that was what's developed through the piece. A link at the end of the second verse begins with the line, on which our faith stands firm upon. And that's repeated, so it grows in intensity each time. As I proclaim the mystery of, and you can see that in the lyric and the melody itself is tied very closely together. So you can come on the journey with it, and when we get to that point, you can enjoy the fireworks that come when the door is actually open. We're actually sharing this experience that we have. It's something that we can approach with passion, and I'm sure that the staff songsters, when they did it, were able to jump in that there. I love the drum kit part that they put for it. I'll often write bass guitar and drum kit parts, but this one I didn't, and they did a great job. As you can see, there's a lot of nuances to it, a lot of passion in it, and I think to counter the interval work, you'll also see that there's some nice long phrases there that sit underneath it to give it some stability. The general style of it as well. I like to borrow ideas and references from stuff both in the army and also outside. And this one, I'm not sure if you know the other another crazy Australian writer in the classical space, Percy Granger. But two pieces that he did, the Walking Tune and the Immovable Doe, have a sort of motion feel like this, where it is going on and using that to feel. The Immovable Doe is actually particularly fun because it's actually got written on the score. This song was about a piece that gets the note C stuck on the keyboard. So when it's being performed, the performer says, these notes should be stuck fast with the pencils and thus held down to the end of the very end of the piece. So it's some interesting ideas that are used to make pieces. But as you can tell, I get stuck on designing pieces. Deadlines are very, very helpful for me. And it's a work of passion and often frustration, but a journey to be able to be part of.
Great, thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing with us. We really do appreciate you being with us this evening and having that introduction to that new song, which I'm sure will be not too familiar to many people, but I'm sure will be one which many leaders will be looking to get their hands on and to use with their respective groups. We, along with many brigades in the UK, are using I've Seen the Glory of the Lord, which is another one of your great hits. And so we thank you very much for writing that song, which has been a real popular hit across here in the UK. And so that is part B over. Now, this is the final part of the evening now, where we're just going to have a general chat with the songwriters, a few questions for them about songwriting and about Salvation Army songwriting. And there will be an opportunity to ask a few questions towards the end of this particular part. So if you do have any questions, do have a think, and we will get around to those in a little while. But Andrew Wicker, is there a Salvation Army composer who has influenced your writing? If so, who is it and why?
I think anyone probably of my age growing up in the army, and if you're interested in vocal music, would probably say that Len Ballantyne was quite influential on the style. I'm just about old enough to remember the sort of impact that his appointment to the staff songsters had on army vocal music, really, in terms of style. It was great to work with Len at TMS in 2012, I think it was. And the man is quite a genius, really. And as I said, he just had such an impact. It was good to see him over here earlier this year for the Staff Songsters 40th anniversary. And I think just thinking about a lot of his songs, he writes a lot of the words himself as well. And how I think from my point of view, he doesn't like to stay in one place too much. He likes to go on quite a journey in terms of the chords he uses and the keys that he passes through as he's writing, and that's kind of had a bit of an impact on what I've tried to do, certainly in my more recent compositions, probably. I'd also like to say that I think Andrew Maycock was being very modest when he was talking about Everywhere, because I think it is such an amazing song that's had quite an impact on many people. And I think had he not written that, I probably wouldn't have written a couple of pieces that I've written where I've used the words of John Gowans, because I think Everywhere kind of made it okay to use those words, because they'd often been, I think they sort of held it, because they're used in the musicals, I think they've been sort of considered quite sacred in their original forms. So because you did that, I think that sort of opened up to many other composers those lyrics for us to use.
Great, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate your thoughts on that one. So for you, Chris, a very similar question, but is there a composer outside of the Salvation Army who's influenced your writing? If so, who and why?
I like to do a lot of listening to expand what my understanding is to help write. So there's a few, actually. For tonal texture for choral writing, I love Jacob Collier and Eric Whittaker. They've just brilliant in how they approach it. I like to explore musical theatre, and Benj and Pasek, who've been doing so much in the last few years. They've been wonderful to listen to. I've done probably the last 2 years I've spent doing quite a lot of crossover arrangements for contemporary worship pieces and songsters and brass band, and outside writers like Thomas Bergeston and Hans Zimmer have been great to balance formula with experimentation to give it some stability, but also something more than block chords, which can often be the fate of many worship pieces. But my favorite classical composer would be Dmitri Shostakovich and Symphony 5, because of the fire in it. So yes, and anyone that can write an I Want Disney song.
Great, thanks, Chris. Appreciate your thoughts on that one. So Keith, we'll bring you back in on this one. So that's you now unmuted. So Keith, you are predominantly a very prolific lyricist within the Salvation Army, a real treasure of the army. We speak fondly of General John Gowans. In my opinion, for what it's worth, you are very much up there alongside General Gowans. You know, personally think an awful lot of you, and obviously delighted that you'll be co-officiating at Sarah and I's wedding in a few months' time. And we've been able to collaborate on a number of pieces, and really do value your contribution to the Salvation Army as a lyricist. The output is vast, and you shared with me some of that output in the last few days. So bearing in mind that you've written a lot of lyrics over the years, is there a particular topic or passage of scripture which you haven't explored yet, which you would be interested in looking into?
Yes, well, first of all, Andrew, thank you for those very gracious words. I'm not worthy of that, but thank you very much indeed. And I'm looking forward to the wedding very much as well. Yeah, I've been preparing a Bible study in the last couple of weeks on the theme of the ascension of Jesus, when Jesus left the planet Earth and went to heaven. And I thought to myself, I don't think I've sung too many songs about the ascension. That we sing about Jesus returning, and of course a part of the promise of the ascension was that this same Jesus will return, but his actual ascending into heaven, I looked at the songbook and I could only find 3 songs that actually dealt with that. So I think there's a little bit of space there to write a song about the ascension of Jesus and the significance of that, because it's really a forgotten festival of the church, certainly the Protestant church. We don't make too much of that, mainly because it falls on a Thursday, always, I think. So I think that's an area I'd like to go into, to write a song, to write some lyrics about the ascension of Jesus.
Great, thanks very much, Keith. We appreciate your thoughts on that one. And Andrew Maycock, over to you. So if you had time to sit down and be creative with absolutely no distractions whatsoever, what would you embark on writing? Is there something on your kind of composer's bucket list that you would like to do?
Well, the no distraction things is never going to happen. When I consider your question when you sent it to me, just beforehand. It's a tough one. I like all sorts of music, and I love Earth, Wind and Fire, and I love rock music, and I try and listen to all sorts of things, and in fact, I'll listen to pretty much everything. I've always also been fascinated with pieces of music that are about the creation or something, really on a biblical scale. But I've never really been brave enough to do anything like that. I'm writing more for band at the moment, being the bandmaster at Millfield, and I'm kind of looking at some stuff right now. Actually, in fact, I've got about 3 things on the go for the band, but that haven't seen the light of day yet. So I'm doing that. But in terms of a bucket list, if I could, and I had absolutely limitless budget, I'd love to write something for an orchestra. Because, I'm sure all of us, love listening to orchestral music as well. And I grew up listening to film scores and Star Wars and E.T. and mainly John Williams stuff that I absolutely love. And some of his stuff moves me to tears because of the timbres that you can capture in an orchestra. So I think if it was a wish, I think I'd love to write something for an orchestra. But I'm actually going through a time. I don't know if the other guys, the songwriters here, have experiences having a writer's block. I'm kind of not out of ideas, but I find it hard to sort of generate ideas at the minute. So if anybody's got some words out there or something that they want me to have a go at, feel free and see what happens. But I think, to get back to your question, I think if I could, I'd love to write something for an orchestra. I think that'd be amazing. Well, I don't know whether...
Thanks, Andrew. We'll look forward to hopefully one day seeing that. But thanks for your thoughts on that. So a few questions now just for any of you just to chip in and answer. And like before, it'd be good to have a couple of people answer these. So Salvation Army music needs to be functional. Okay, it needs to be functional. It needs to be fit for purpose. It needs to be for the many, not the few, to use that turn of phrase. particularly if it's going to be published in the journals. However, do you think that there is a danger of functionality getting in the way of creativity, pushing boundaries, and trying new things? What do you think?
I mean, I will step in. I think obviously over the years, writing has changed, and writing for songsters, if we're just thinking about choral things, years ago is a lot more technically difficult to sing properly than the stuff that's largely coming out at the moment. It's a lot more technically demanding. I even think back to when I was in the singing company and some of the things that we used to sing in the singing company in 3 or 4 parts, you know, and if you gave that to some singing companies now, they might struggle. You know, I think of songs like Golden Day, and I've gone blank now, typical. But you know, even singing things then, that they were more technically demanding. So I think that music over the years in the Salvation Army for singing has actually got slightly less technical. I don't mean it's easier, I just mean it's less, you know, it's not as technically demanding. But I don't know if it gets in the way of creativity. I'm not sure. Andrew Blythe once backed a song back to me because it was in too difficult a key. Maybe that's because he had a problem with it, but I don't know.
Yeah, Andrew, Wicker, you were going to jump in there. Have you got some thoughts on this one?
I think as a writer, you kind of want your music to be used, probably. So I think you probably want to write music that is going to be accessible to as many people as possible quite often. And I guess the average size of a songster brigade in the army is probably about 12, 14 people these days in most corps. And so you've got to be mindful of that when you write, really, I guess, if you're wanting your music to be published in the army journals, really. I don't think that necessarily means that you can't be a bit more creative, possibly. I mean, I probably just write what comes to me, really, and then see how it's appropriate to be used, really.
Yeah, great. I think one of the important points to make, and we've kind of touched on that with Andrew Maycock's song with Everywhere, is obviously that there are occasionally kind of optional parts in smaller print, which do give that extra opportunity for a bit of stretch and challenge. Think of Chris's song, I've Seen the Glory. The last 2 notes for top soprano, top B flat, top C. We've got a little angel who bats that one out really well, and she sings that greatly. But obviously that's an opportunity for some people if they want that. So I suppose within that functionality, there's still opportunities for that stretch and challenge, which they supply through those little notes and those optional parts. And so here's another question which might just get you thinking a little bit. And so there've been some groundbreaking worship songs written by other churches and other denominations, like Bethel, like Elevation, Red Rocks Worship, Hillsongs. And some of these songs have found their way into Salvation Army worship. Do you think that we are a little bit behind in our songwriting? And should there be more focus on producing music like this in addition to the stuff that we're currently doing as well? What do you think? Chris Brindley, go for it.
Thinking, yeah, Australia is certainly the one of the places that a lot of this music comes from, and even the army in Australia, we go through new music very quickly. So a piece will come out from Hillsong or Planet Shakers or Elevation, or any of the Passion Conference, and within 4 weeks, it'll be expected to be used in corps in some place. I think that's one of the challenges that we have with our publishing processes, is that they can take years for an arrangement to be published and come out. And by that time, our pieces generally aren't in high rotation. So it's it's a challenge to be able to get music out in time and get it spread through the system, which is something I was working towards when I was music secretary. But I think it's certainly an and. I think we'd be very much doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't have instrumental music, if we didn't have choirs, because they form so much of a backbone of our music education system. It's something that we can connect very well with schools and with up and coming musicians. In the same way, I think it would be remiss of us to ignore so much of the music that's connecting with people in general culture as well. In Australia, we aren't a brass band country. People appreciate it as a special interest group. So what connects well with people when they come into a meeting or as part of youth events. I mentioned before that I've been doing some crossover arrangements, and we've been at our core we've been doing a number of almost Pentecostal style worship nights, but also using the band and the songsters. And there can be quite a lot of good technical work put into the pieces. It's like a festival series worship piece, but it doesn't need to be inaccessible either, and it can be something that's pleasant for all. So I think along the whole spectrum, there's an opportunity for us to really explore.
Great. Keith, have you got some thoughts on this one, maybe from an officer's perspective, in terms of songwriting? Are we a little bit behind? Do you think we should be adapting to some other churches as well as doing what we're doing? What do you think?
Yeah, well, maybe we're a little bit behind in some ways, perhaps. We might feel that. But we're also rich. We're very, very rich in what we have, and we shouldn't feel that we have to look elsewhere necessarily to be better, because what we have is good, and it suits. We use what suits our worship style, but at the same time we should be open to other songs from other places, other sources. If it's going to enrich our worship, the bottom line is communication. What we're about is communicating the message of Jesus and the truth of the gospel and the radical nature of the kingdom of God. And whatever does that, let's use it and let's go for it, and do all we can to present the gospel in a convincing way.
Great. Thanks for your thoughts, Keith.
Can I just say, sorry.
Andrew.
I think that, I think I completely agree with what's just been said. I think there are some pockets of it in the army coming through. I mean, I think my friends in the group Maycock, for instance, they're releasing some songs that would be in that mould. I remember when we did the For Him second album, there's quite a number of original tracks on there that would probably fit into that. It's just having the opportunity for that music to get out into the general consciousness of people. And what there isn't at the moment really is a way of that happening. There's no sort of publication of that music at the moment. I've seen a lot of people doing videos in the last few weeks, and I guess that's one way that could come about. But yeah, it's just, I think there are examples of it, but it's perhaps just not as widely known as it could be.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Andrew. I suppose just to see how things develop over the next little while will be interesting to observe. And obviously the possibilities are endless. We're a worldwide movement, and music does travel from territory to territory, and the other churches do enrich our kind of music scene, and how we can also contribute into that sort of mould as well. Will be interesting to see how songwriting develops over the next little while. So thanks for your thoughts on that particular question. So kind of the final one from me then is, does anybody have any hopes or ambitions for Salvation Army songwriting moving forward?
I guess I'd like to see people continue to look at what can be done with the people that are available. One of the things that I think I fear is cookie cutter songs, where pieces are written to match parameters as opposed to being able to inspire by new ideas. I think that's one of the reasons I do songwriting. Lyrics are incredibly hard for me, but I strongly feel that everyone has an opportunity to have a personal experience and with God, and to be able to tell that story, and to be able to express that, and to be able to share it with others so that they can be inspired. That's incredibly powerful. I love the arrangements that people have done, and there's so many fine arrangers here that have used Gowans and Larson's pieces, and pieces that have come from the songbook, and they speak to me powerfully. But to be able to share it from a personal experience is something that's truly special.
Super. Anyone else want to jump in on that one? Kind of hopes, ambitions moving forward for songwriting in the army?
Let's do all we can to encourage new writers to come along, encourage young people that we have. Let's give them every opportunity we can, every encouragement. You know, it's been very traumatic for me to realise that in this coronavirus crisis, I come in the vulnerable and aged category. You know, I'm on the way out now, so you know, there are new hands, new minds, new hearts out there. Let's do all we can to encourage it.
Super. Thanks very much, Keith and Chris, for your thoughts on that one. Time is swiftly moving on, and we do need to wrap things up, but there is time for one question. If somebody would like to ask a question, then the opportunity is there to do so. If you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you. I may have to actually have a look through the many screens, but if you would like to ask a question, then we do have time for one, and it will have to be very, very quick indeed. Go for it, Malcolm.
I've got a question for Commissioner Banks, who tells us now he's got a great future behind him. I don't believe that. But Keith, when you're thinking of songs, do you think of what you are currently experiencing, or do you ever delve into your lifelong experiences of the past?
I guess it's both, really. Is that Malcolm, by the way?
That is Malcolm, yeah. Malcolm Quinn, the one and only.
Yeah. I often write from what I'm feeling. I guess a lot of the deeper stuff the deeper work comes from my mood and my feeling, and what I said about broken green glass at the beginning sort of had a lot to do with my own feeling, you know,
yeah,
that beauty and brokenness. But the whole of life contributes to what actually is produced in a set of lyrics. I'm not sure that answers the question, Malcolm, but I guess most come from the deep heart experience.
Super. Thanks, Keith, and thanks, Malcolm, for your question. And so, Ed Milcrease, I think you've put your hand up. So very quickly, Ed, do you want to just fire away? Are you there, Ed? Maybe, maybe not. No, I think we've lost you. But if you want to submit your question, then we'll be more than happy to hear from you. So with that in mind, we'll just wrap things up then and just say a big thank you to our songwriters for joining us this evening. We really, really do appreciate your time, your talent, and your expertise, and sharing that journey with us. Been very interesting indeed, and I personally really appreciate you coming along and buying into this initiative. There is another one, if you've enjoyed this evening, there is another one on the 26th of May, so that's the last Tuesday of May, and that will feature Paul Sharman, Gavin Whitehouse, Lee Fisher, and also John Martin, and many of them have actually been in on this course, so they kind of know what to expect, and that'll be another great evening indeed. Lee has an event on Friday evening entitled Meet the Composer. Lee, can I just unmute you? Do you want to just give a better advert than I would probably give for that one? Thanks, Lee.
Hi, Andrew. yeah, it's two of TV's, well, UK TV's composers, Paul Farrer and Mark Sylvan. They've composed the Chase music and Tipping Point and various other pieces of music. And they're going to come on for a chat, a bit like this, on Friday night at 7:30. Just look for the event on Facebook. It's called Meet the Composers. Just go onto my page. And if you're interested in how kind of the professionals do it, I suppose, then because we all try and aspire to be the best we can be, then come along to that event. And thank you for tonight. Thanks, guys, for your input tonight and what you've done. It's been really interesting. So thank you.
Thanks, Lee. And we look forward to hearing from you on next month's Songwriters Circle. We're just going to share a prayer to close. I do have a couple of verses to share with you. And I wonder, looking on the screen, we've got our Corps Officer, Major Linda Billard. Would you mind sharing a prayer with us in a few moments' time, Linda? And I'll unmute you. But I do have a couple of verses just to share in closing. And the first one is from Ephesians 2, verse 10. It says, God created you to do amazing things. And the second one is 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58, which says, always do your work well for the Lord. You know that whatever you do for him will not be a waste of time or effort. And so with that in mind, to our 4 songwriters and to everybody who has signed in to be part of this gathering tonight, continue to do amazing things for the Lord with the gifts, talents and skills he has given you, knowing that whatever you do for him is not a waste of time or effort. Linda, if you would pray with us, that would be great. Thank you.
Father God, we just thank you for this time that we've been able to share together this evening. We do thank you, God, that you are an amazing God and that you gift us with amazing gifts. And I thank you for those that have shared this evening, that have shared their gifts and shared their experience and knowledge of you through their music, through their writing of music and through their script of music. Father, I praise you because you are the one who calls us into a relationship with you. And our music and our singing and our songwriting helps us to express what it is to be in relationship with you. Father, you are creator of all, and we thank you for all that you have created amongst us here this evening. We've heard from 4, but I'm sure, Lord, there are many more here that have gifts and talents that offer to you, and you bless and you use. Father, I thank you that your word reminds us that you are singing over us, that we are so precious that you sing over us. So help us to open our ears to hear that melody, particularly in these days, Lord, we pray, because we love you and we want you to know that we love you and we praise you. So help us to hear you singing over us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And thanks very much, everybody. Stay safe and stay well, and feel free to sign out of the call when you're ready to do so. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.